Welcome to the Warren Cycling Podcast. My name is Dean Warren. I'm in Sarasota, Florida today.
And I'm Randy Warren, and I'm in Asheville, North Carolina.
And we are super excited to have the newly crowned U.S. Cyclocross national champion, riding for the Steve Tilford Foundation, Curtis White. Welcome.
Hey, Curtis.
Hey guys, thank you very much for having me on. For everyone listening, my name is Curtis White, and I am tuning in from Sittard in the Netherlands. So we have a pretty, yeah, we're all over the place here.
Yeah, well, I just got back from Germany. I was in Frankfurt area Sunday, and it was really cold. So I don't know if it was the same cold there, but it was like, in the low 20s. But of course, I'm coming from Florida, so that, it seems like really cold to me.
Well, yeah. So we right after the national championships, we took a couple days to pack, and we left Wednesday, 72 hours after the race, and arrived last Thursday morning. And last Friday, we woke up to, it was snowing. There was a nice dusting on the ground, temperatures below freezing. And really for the next 3 days, temperatures stayed below freezing or around that point. And it was a nice break. When we come over here, we're very used to it's, mid 40s or low 50s. It's raining a lot, and you have to get used to training in all these different conditions. Like if you're racing in the rain, you got to train in the rain as well. But, when it was freezing and snowing, like it provided a really cool opportunity to explore this area that's become a home away from home for me, in a new way, like, trying new trails, or you have to ride on the snow and the ice. And it wasn't a lot, but it was a different way to explore this area. So I had a lot of fun, and, testing out the tubulars in icy conditions, which is always good to practice the skills on, but also just a fun way to kind of get the hours back in the legs and, shake the travel out. So we're back to 50 degrees and raining today though. So
would you have liked to have raced in Italy on the snow in the World Cup? I mean, is that something that you would be interested to try? I mean, man, that's crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we were thinking about it, but logistically it just was too, it was a little too much. Like we have 3 riders on our team. I race for the Steve Tilford Foundation racing team, and we have 3 full-time mechanics with a team. And sometimes the racing weekends get hectic enough where we have to hire extra help. And, this season also, we had a really cool partnership with the Bear Development cycling team, where Bear Development's mostly a mountain bike development program, but also has a number of cyclocross athletes that through a partnership with Trek, we were able to bring them into our compound, our setup, and provide them an infrastructure to have the mechanical support, but also have that idea of this, we're trying to create a development pipeline. Like athletes on this development team get to look up to pro cyclocross athletes and kind of pick their brain about whatever they want in that moment. We're pre-riding the courses together. We're dialing in the equipment together. We're talking about tactics and training and recovery and all of these pieces of the puzzle, if you will. So that was a really cool experience for this year. And weekend in, weekend out, we had a number of Bear Development athletes in our tents, and it was a nice element to have. And we had some good camaraderie under the tents, and there was always laughter. But sometimes bringing in some extra help for that, and we're going over to Europe, packing up all the bikes, all the wheels, all the tubulars, and right after nationals, Val di Sole was just one step too far, I think. So we decided to come right to Sittard, the Netherlands, where we're going to be based out of for the next month, and just kind of getting used to this and dialing in the process. And we're going to start racing this Friday in Mol, Belgium, and then the World Cup in Havre, and then the entire curse period after that.
Sure. Yeah, and actually, before we riding the snow isn't really going to be helpful either right now. I mean, it'd be fun to do, but you're not going to have anything else like that. I mean, I think the reason why they started doing it originally was because they had to prove that cyclocross could be ridden on snow if it was going to be petitioned to be an Olympic sport, in the wintertime and stuff too. But it's not really typical of what you're going to be racing between now and in Worlds anyway.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not. It was cool to see the weather come in right now as we arrived. So we may get another week. I haven't seen the weather that far out, but I mean, it's always fun to mix it up, right? I mean, just for me and my passion as a cyclocross rider and viewing any condition as a challenge, it's just fun for me.
All right. Before we talk too much about what's coming up, and where you are right now, well, we got to talk about this national championship, because that was pretty spectacular. And I know cycling's so great, I think, in a sport, because there's so many stories of riders, having to overcome maybe different things that happened in their career to finally reach that big goal that they've had. And for you, I imagine, being a national champion must have been way up there on your list of goals of what you'd want to accomplish. And now you did it, and it was a, really great race. So just tell us, I mean, are you thinking about, I mean, you had to, like you said, pack up, get ready. You're over in Europe. You got everything in front of you now. Did you have much time to really savor that win and enjoy it? And just tell us about how you feel now as a national champion.
Yeah. So it's, the effort was, we had to pivot pretty quickly after the race to packing up for Europe. And, the mechanics definitely had a full plate with, trying to organize all the equipment, breaking down our setup in the snowstorm in Hartford, and then transitioning to packing up the bikes and the wheels and keeping track of what tubulars they're bringing over. And it was definitely a rush. But we were able to take some time Sunday night to relax, have a nice party, and just to celebrate what that meant. And I don't think, I mean, in a way it hasn't sunk in yet, because it's a goal that I've chased for quite a long time. And there have been, I heard 17 or 18 years of racing cyclocross at a national championship level, starting when I was 10 years old in the Cub Juniors, and then climbing through the ranks, and then slowly taking the sport more seriously and dialing in my training and making more investment, my family investing in this, and trying to find the right coach and the right equipment and the right team and programs, and surrounding myself with the right people. And yeah, there's been a lot of years of almosts and a lot of close calls. And there are a lot of years that I just wasn't good enough to do it either. But I was always consistent enough to where only 1 year of me racing cyclocross national championships was I ever out of the top 5. And I finished 6th. And it also happened to be the last time the national championships were in Hartford, Connecticut. It was my last year as an under 23. And I came in, I don't think it's arrogant to say that I was the overwhelming favorite, because I was at a pretty good level that year. I was Pan American champion. I was getting top 10s in Europe, and I cracked mentally. Like I was making more mistakes that day than really I would most any other race. It was probably one of the worst performing days of my career, just because from a process perspective, I fumbled it. It wasn't a good day. But for all those years, I was able to be consistent. And, for the last 3 years, especially in the elites, last 3 editions of nationals, we had a COVID year in there, but 3 silver medals in a row. It was very, a lot of time, nose to the grindstone, just trying to, believing that I was capable of this. And, it finally happened.
Yeah, it must be really satisfying. And with the weather conditions and being in Hartford, as it got colder and snowier, were you thinking, yeah, this is what I want. This is what's going to, really separate maybe me from, I mean, Eric's a really fast rider, but I've noticed this year, it seems like he's pushing himself pretty hard to where he is making mistakes or having more crashes. And so, I think a faster, maybe even less technical course maybe suits him more, where you excel, especially in more technical or bad weather. Is that fair to say, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's what we've seen all year up to this point. We've had courses that are, faster, more pedaling heavy, and Eric certainly, I mean, the Fayetteville World Cup is a prime example of that. Like that was the best result an American man's gotten in a World Cup up to date. Like that was a really, that was an incredible ride. And as much as Eric and we've been going back and forth all year long, and for the last couple of years, I've seen him come through the ranks, and he was a couple of years younger than me through the junior years, and under 23 years, but he's always been knocking on the door. And to see him come into his own as a racer and to achieve those results, and as a competitor, like, yeah, it pisses you off a little and motivates you. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to find admiration in those types of performances of your competitors. Like, and I wouldn't have admitted it openly earlier in the year, perhaps, just, we're competitors, and that's just the way it is. But in my process and privately, I deeply admired that ride and that performance and what he's been able to do over the last couple of years and how he's been able to progress. And through admiration, I think I was able to find motivation. And I try to find a piece of admiration with all my competitors with, all right, so what are they doing well? Find that respect. How do I do it better? And that's kind of a big piece of the puzzle that I've been trying to figure out. So yeah, starting off the year, I mean, we can go throughout the entire season. There was a storyline of the USCX and, our national series now that's in the second year, but I feel like all the athletes are starting to take it a bit more seriously. There's broadcasted coverage and there's prize money, and we're able to get some good competition there. And, he came out swinging. I was able to kind of close the gap through Rochester, especially the muddy day in Rochester, day 2, where, almost getting back to Vincent Bastons, and then he came up, but again, we saw a couple of mistakes from him, and same in Charm City, Baltimore. I was able to grab the win, which is that was one of my best rides of the season. I was very, very happy with that, and to be the guy to beat the Belgian in our national series, that was a really special feeling. But those are really messy conditions, and I feel like with my experience and kind of where I've gone through the sport, I've been able to find that maturity to be patient in these races. I'm not going out, heart rate 190 on the first lap. I'm trying to maybe sit back a little and perhaps study what the other riders are doing and seeing different lines and having the confidence to say, this isn't the preferred line I'm on, but I have the technical ability to ride it and to correct whatever mistakes I'm making or to try new things in the race. I think that's a really important thing in cyclocross, where it's just so much of it is technique, and it's all about, how do I save 50 watts here or 30 watts there? It's, minimizing those small accelerations. So yeah, the heavier muddy days, I felt like the advantage always was more with me, but that didn't mean I was entitled to a national championship. Like, no one's entitled to anything.
It played out kind of like at nationals too, right? Because I mean, so were you running the descent that you rode the last lap before that? Because it was a little unclear in terms of that, but you were kind of looking again for the spot that would make the difference, and then it did make a difference right then too. So it's kind of like what you're saying. You were preparing in some ways. I mean, every race you do, right? But when you talk to the juniors too, I know just as a coach, when I pre-ride courses with juniors, I like that because it makes me more aware too. Like, I'm going to be aware if I'm riding it anyway, but then I have to stop and tell them, hey, here's the best line, or here's what you should be doing here, or here's how you should set this up. Then it kind of helps solidify that in my mind too, right? Of what is the best too, instead of just making a decision on the fly, which may not be the best one, right? And then that kind of all culminated into, I mean, of course, the nationals, there was 1,000 decisions you made the whole race, but the ones that make the biggest difference, right towards the end of being able to ride a descent that was maybe
the off-camber descent. That's where you're like holding that card up the sleeve, because you knew you had the skill set to really make a difference in riding it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I think that there's a quote that's been going around. It's there's 1,000 ways to lose a race, but only one way to win it, and you need to figure out that one way. And also talking about the maturity I've been able to gain over the years of maybe sitting back and trying to see what other riders are doing. Like, we saw the snow falling. We saw that the ground was softening up right before the race and the conditions were changing quickly. On the first lap, I was behind Lance Haydet, and Scott Funston jetted right in front of me, and I saw that both of them start to slide and dismount. So the natural choice was just maintain, follow, and do what they're doing. And they started to really struggle, I think Scott tried to ride it, or he slipped a little bit more. He tried to go high and remount. I thought I saw that, but I wanted to maintain that momentum moving forward. And while I saw what Lance was able to do, I saw what Funston was able to do on the first lap, and I saw what Eric was able to do like laps 2 and 3. I didn't get a real feel for what some of the other riders like Kerry Warner or Caleb Schwartz or Tobin Ortenblad, 3 guys I think that are very good in these sloppy conditions. They were also able to ride that last bit of the hill, but I didn't see it. So I was going off of what I saw what Lance was doing and Brunner and Funston. It was very slick. I think running was the safest and most consistent option. But the last 2 laps, once I had caught Brunner, I needed to, now I'm here. I need to figure out how to win this bike race. And I felt like he still is a very strong rider. Power wise, it would be very difficult to go head to head with him. We could be fighting for, it very easily could have turned into a battle like I had with Vincent Bassans the second day of Charm City, where we went into the last half lap together on a very heavy course. And we were literally fighting for every corner. And the race was decided by who didn't make the last mistake. That's the rider who won. That would have been a risk on this day. And I felt like I was able to find that advantage descending the hill. And it was a free 5 seconds. I tried that with a lap and a half to go. I made sure I did it behind Eric so he didn't see. And I was able to make up 5 seconds instantly. Like it was with no effort. So I knew 1 lap to go, all the cards on the table. That was the move.
Yeah, it's always kind of risk and reward, like you said, there's 1,000 ways to lose. And so you have to kind of pick the one that you think will make the biggest difference, that is worth that risk. Because there's a lot of mistakes you can make that aren't worth it, right? I mean, there's like, sure, I might be able to ride this off camera here too, but it's if I do fall, the consequences are way too much. It's not worth making that risk. So there's always those decisions for, especially in cross too. And then cross too is the whole different element that you kind of look for your competitors to make a mistake. We're doing a road race or even a gravel race, or I'd even doing more gravel instead of flats. And you feel bad. Like in a road race, you'd be like, oh, let's slow down, let them change it and catch back up, but in gravel, you're like, oh, hey, too bad. You just keep going, and same thing kind of with cross too. Right. It's like, if someone stumbles on a barrier, you don't say, oh, here, I'll wait for you, but it's just, that's part of the game. The mistakes are a bigger part of the game in cross. And you can't ever feel like, you're taking advantage of someone making a mistake necessarily, because it's just, you're taking advantage of an opportunity more than a mistake. Right.
Right. And that's something that's so unique about cyclocross, in my opinion, is that, I find it to be an extremely honest discipline of racing. Like it's oftentimes like the best rider will win the day. It's not rocket science. And I think there are multiple ways to define the best rider. Like if you're the strongest rider that day and it was all power, like let's say, the Fayetteville World Cup, that was, you had an honest race. If the goal is to, you're on really slick, muddy and icy ground and there's frozen ruts, and with a lot of running, like it's who had the best skill set on that day. And a part of it is knowing your equipment, knowing how to ride your equipment, making good decisions with your tire pressure and making sure like the difference between the front and the rear, that ratio is solid. You've had that figured out for the entire year. And carrying your momentum. That's huge. And I think, honestly, the lap after Eric got the gap on me, I think we're going into finishing the 3rd lap. I slipped on a steep ride up. Eric was able to ride. I had to get off and run. That was 5 seconds right there. Eric was able to pull out his best lap of the race. And going back and rewatching the live stream on Flow Bikes, for anyone listening here, if you haven't seen the race, I definitely encourage you to go back to, it's broadcasted on Flow Bikes. You can go back and watch it and try to pick up some of the kind of the finer details of the technique. That's something that I've always been very interested in. Even when you go back and watch like classic battles with Sven Nys and Niels Albert, like the difference in technique is really huge. After lap 3, I thought that was Eric's best lap. And it also happened to be my worst lap. And it was just, he went below 9 minutes and I was like a 9:08 or something. Like the gap went up to 10, 11 seconds maybe. But it was a really good lap from him. And you could see that how he was carrying his momentum, running on the descent, on the transitions. Like, yeah, he was putting his foot out a lot in some of the slick turns, but he was still able to carry really good speed. And that was one lap where he was the best that lap. And he followed that up with a lap of 3 or 4 mistakes, sliding out in a couple turns. And then we go into the final 2 laps where 3 to go, I started gaining momentum. I'm coming into 2 to go with, 2 really fast lap times now. And Eric makes a slip and a rut and crashes. But this is also after 3 or 4 mistakes up to that point. So it wasn't like it came out of the blue. It was, we're starting to see the effort is taxing. And it was a very heavy course where I was able to, once that gap was established, keep it consistent, stay in it mentally. The mental side of that day was one of the most important sides. Like, yeah, technically you need to have everything there. You need to do your homework and dial in the equipment. But every other race this year, when Eric went and he got the gap, that was the race. And it slowly went out to 15 seconds and it would jump to 20 or 25. And that's the race. And I couldn't bring it back. But I had to really have faith in my ability to keep it close. I was still in the running for the Stars and Stripes and anything could happen because it was a treacherous day. So we're entering, the final 2 laps, something does happen. I was close enough to take advantage of that. And then there's a very clear shift in momentum from Eric to me. And then I tried that move on the descent with the final lap and a half. I figure out where I want to win this race. And I mean, that we can really go into the last lap, but it was just for me on that last lap, once I got the gap, I had to visualize that the finish line was after every turn because I knew that Eric wasn't going to leave an ounce out there and neither was I. So it was just imagining that the finish line was at the end of every turn. And, the effort was massive, but you also have to figure out that it was months and months and years and seasons of doing the homework and doing the technical work and just, being a well-rounded racer because it took every skill to pull that off.
I think it's helpful to have other cyclists hear you say that because mental is such a huge part of it, like you said, because there are times when, if you get the whole shot, then you're behind and then, it's like maybe you'll never see the leaders again, or maybe you'll catch back up that group. But then if someone starts riding away again, maybe you'll never see them again. But you have to always be thinking in your mind, you don't know what's going to happen both to you and to them. And so if you don't, keep on it, you might miss the opportunity because then if something does happen and you weren't ready for it, then, you just blew that chance to get the win or to make up spots and stuff too. And so I think that happens to a lot of cyclists because again, I'm a coach and so I deal with cyclists all the time. And you're constantly trying to reinforce that every moment needs to be your best moment because you don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of people think, well, Curtis, you've been doing this forever. It's like you don't have to worry about that, right? It's like, you're dialed in mentally, but you really kind of have to prepare yourself beforehand and then during the race, right? Over and over and over again, like say, nope, just do this the best I can, do this the best I can. I don't know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's, I've had a couple conversations since last Sunday and, a couple people have said, well, it took you 18 or 17 years to really dial in the mental side, huh? And it's like, no, it's definitely a challenge still. And, you still get nervous before races. I think that's always going to be a good thing, but it's learning how to control those nerves and to not attach, a lot of the excitement to your result. Like all the banners that you see at a race, like that's not for us, the racers. That's for the spectators, and that's USA Cycling and the event organizers and promoters. They're putting on a show. Mm-hmm. They may not be the banners that we see all year long. We only see them once a year, but that's not for us. The battle is for us. The competition is for us. The process is for us. The equipment, like all of these things that we still deal with day in, day out, weekend in, weekend out. Those are the things that I try to focus on. And I mean, there's always stress too when you're a pro athlete and you have the pressure from sponsors and teams to really nail it those championship days. And it, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like that's the side that, as a coach, I'm sure, Randy, you can help your athletes prepare as best they can physiologically, but the mental side can really throw off whatever numbers you see. Like if you're sleeping in your own bed, you're training consistently, you're eating everything you want, like you could be cranking out some of your best numbers, but then throw in, you're in a hotel, you don't have access to similar food. There's a lot of energy around a national championship event. That was something that took me years to figure out, is that I need to spend as little time at the venue as possible. Clock in, clock out. You got to do your pre-ride and get out of Dodge, because it is
straining.
It is straining. Like, I mean, I think of student athletes, like, a lot of collegiate athletes at the Cyclocross Nationals were dealing with exams either that week or the week after. And as a student, I graduated in 2018, but I always found that exam week was the most stressful week physically, because mental stress does translate into physical stress. So if you spend all this time thinking about the banners and the race and the excitement, all these things, it's going to zap your legs. As a student athlete, my school operated off a trimester. So my exams were middle of November before Thanksgiving, but it always fell on the cross weekend of New York Supercross. And it was just, I could always feel that effort in the legs. And it was very, very noticeable. And that's something that a lot of young athletes maybe don't understand. And, I hope coaches are able to kind of provide that guidance of, mental stress does translate to physical stress.
And getting used to things too. I always have my athletes go to nationals and big events, even before they're competitive, just so that they get used to what it feels like and what it is like, so that they might not have the experience yet to be a high performer in terms of, the race results. But if they can get used to what's going on and those kind of things too, then that's less new things that are happening to them, less that they don't expect. Things are more familiar with too, and that can make a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's just taking time to recognize that effort. You may not be able to get 100% used to it, but once you recognize that is there, it's up to you to make the best decisions for you and your performance.
Tell us a little bit about the Steve. You mentioned Steve Tilford. It's funny because I raced with Steve, and I remember at Masters Worlds when they were in Louisville, Steve and I stayed at the hotel, and we were just talking about the course, and the conditions changed tremendously for us. Our preliminary race was in 4-inch deep mud, and then it all froze. And so our finals was in 4-inch deep ruts, because they didn't do a very good job of refreshing the course and stuff. And Steve said, hey, if you're a good racer, it doesn't matter what the conditions are. And I'm a much better, really fast racer. Like if it's a fast course, I'm competitive on the highest level. But if it's really super muddy or, then I struggle more. And he's like, hey, so he had a and Steve was Steve. Right? He was so talented and stuff too, and it's so tragic what happened to him in that too. But tell us about the Steve Tilford Foundation team a little bit, and what's going on with that.
Yeah, so this is my first year racing for the Steve Tilford Foundation racing team, and there are several goals with what the foundation does, and it really the heart and soul of it is to continue to promote cyclocross and development of young athletes, and providing a development pipeline for young athletes to grow in this sport and to find success and to find meaning in it. After Sunday, there were a few people that came up to me and said that these were Steve Tilford conditions, in Hartford. And I thought about that little, like, the legacy that we're trying to, or that the foundation is trying to carry on of Steve's, is like, he had that real old school grit. Like, I think I said it earlier in this podcast, but if you race in the rain, you train in the rain. It's the same thing in the snow. If you're racing the snow, you train in the snow. If you race in the mud, you train in the mud. And I think there are a lot of athletes, especially young athletes now, where we live in a very analytical world where you can measure anything. Like, I use a Whoop strap to measure my recovery and my sleep and my HRV. And when I'm traveling, that's very helpful in forming trends. It's very good. Or, training with a power meter and a heart rate monitor, like, that's very normal. And when you meet your metrics, it's awesome. But what about those days that are just unquantifiable? Like, it's raining outside. What do? You could either stay inside, hit the checkbox with all the numbers that you need to meet for your intervals, or recognize that it's an opportunity to work on your technical skills. And that's it's something very specific to cyclocross, but I think that cyclocross in that regard does create better bike racers. You know, that you can be an athlete and then you could be a racer. Those could be two different things sometimes. Mm-hmm. And racers are the ones that are able to, anyone can perform when they're at 100%, but it takes a real racer to find success when they're at 75%. And to do that, you need to maximize your skill set, find out how to save energy in certain ways, and to find that grit. And it does translate into other disciplines, whether it be mountain biking or on the road. Go back to riders who are finding success in the Tour and look at how many of them came from a cyclocross background or an off-road background. Mm-hmm. It's quite a few. And I think riders like Van der Poel and Wout van Aert are starting to change the perception of, you need to be a little bit more well-rounded. You need to, yes, cyclocross is good and teaches you the technical side, but when you're training for cyclocross, you also need to run and train that, build that bone density and that impact of your muscles, and move the body in a different way. Sometimes just do it in the off season, but it's just be a little bit more well-rounded, or the technical side or the more explosive side. Like it just helps you be a bit more well-rounded. So to tie this back to, what the Steve Tilford Foundation represents and what this team represents, I think it's, we're a multi-surface team, but I think at its core, we, with our partnership with the Bear Development Team, trying to provide a junior development pipeline or under 23 development pipeline, just developing young athletes, giving them the tools to succeed, but also mentoring them in ways to succeed in, aside from the numbers and aside from the results. What kind of grit does it take to be an athlete, or what sort of perseverance do you need to go out when it's snowing and it's covered in ice, or to finish off a maximum effort and it starts to snow, or you're in shin deep mud? These are the things that you just can't quantify on a power meter.
Yeah. And things changed so much too. Like I was saying, like Fayetteville last year was fast or was muddy, super, super muddy and slow and terrible. And this year was fast. So you can't even say like, oh, Fayetteville is my course, because it changes so much too, that if you aren't resilient in those ways, if you aren't ready for whatever is going to happen, then it's going to come back and bite you.
I found myself personally when I want to train, and if the weather's not good, and I have a little mental battle in my head, like, oh, do I really want to go out? Once I get out, maybe, I don't know, it doesn't take like that long, 10, 50 minutes. I'm always so happy I did decide, because everything just kind of, your body gets, once it's warmed up, it takes 10, 15 minutes for me, like on the road. Once you go, and I kind of like that man against nature kind of challenge in a way too. And I'm always happy I do it, but there's still a mental struggle almost every time, because I forget how much that I do like it once I get out, but it's hard to get it, step out the door first, but you just make yourself. And then once you do, I think it's pretty cool when you, especially if you're out there and other people are inside because they can't handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. I always grew up. My dad would always, even when it was, when it was nasty out, we had pretty rough winters in upstate New York, and we would take the snowplow and snowblower and just create some trails around the backyard. And we'd love to just tear around, and it's snowing and it's freezing. And, growing up with the idea of, yeah, you may not always want to start the ride, but no one ever regrets the ride when they finish it.
Yeah, and eventually your feet do thaw out. It's always
you can't feel them, so
yeah, well, you can't feel them. Then you're in the shower, and then the feeling comes back. You're like, oh, but no, it's worth it. Hey, can you talk to us just a little bit? Do you have conversations in your head then during these races where you're encouraging yourself? Do you tell yourself specific things? Are you talking to yourself through the race, or have anything like, I'm gonna nail this? I like just kind of like pumping yourself up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, self-talk is a huge part of the mental game. And, yeah, it's definitely a huge part. And I mean, I have mantras, or sometimes I write phrases on my handlebars, and just when you're that deep and very focused in a race, you don't really have a lot of coherent thoughts. Some of your thoughts are not rational or based in reality, and you kind of go to a dark place. So we don't need to talk too much about that. It's kind of a journey that every athlete has for on their own. But some of the mantras I have, it like at the last 2 laps, I don't remember having a really coherent thought, and I don't remember much of the race. Like it was a total state of flow. But one of the things that I wrote on my handlebars, and I asked my coach and my dad on the side of the course to yell to me anytime I would pass, is head and hands. Very basic phrase, but it means much more to me than probably you'd think. Just focusing on where's your head and where are your hands. If your head's in a good posture, if you're slumped down, you're not looking where you're going, you're kind of not breathing fully, and your posture is not very good, and if your hands are kind of on the bars just limping, like you just know what good posture is in the bike. So if I'm focusing, all right, I need a corrective moment, I just made a mistake, I need to get out of this funk, where are my head and hands? If I can focus on my posture, if I'm holding the handlebars right, I'm able to shift and brake efficiently. If I'm looking where I'm going, if I'm breathing correctly, the rest of the form will follow. So the last few laps, when I'm closing the gap to Eric, or when I'm fully committed to this move on the side, the side of this off-camber descent, I'm still trying to bring everything back to my posture and not think about where my legs are at, or how bad I'm hurting, or if I'm cold. Like posture always came first in the mental game, and kind of finding a little mantra to refocus that has been really big for me over the last couple of years. That's a little mantra I've had for, maybe the last 3 or 4 seasons, but it does mean quite a bit to me. And I think there are many athletes that have their own mantras. It's not like I'm not sharing a trade secret and worried that, someone's going to take my mantra. It's like what means the world to me could mean absolutely nothing to you, because I have no understanding of what you respond to as an athlete when you're in the deepest, darkest place in the middle of a bike race. Like when your heart rate's 190, only you know what you respond to mentally. And I think that's kind of the beautiful journey of sport, where sometimes we go to dark places in races to finish the job. I will say that I went to that place in Hartford, and that's an experience that very few people have, and it's in essence a gift, but it's also up for each individual athlete to figure out what mantras work for them, and what self-talk is constructive, because there's a lot of deconstructive self-talk as well.
So you focus on the bad things, more bad things will come. So you just got to get out of that place.
Right. Don't hit the tree. What tree? That tree? You hit the tree. Like you need to kind of refocus on how do I keep moving forward, carrying that momentum, and whatever works for you as an athlete. So that's in the mental side. To get back to that, that's something I've had to spend a lot of time working on.
So tell us now, you're back in Europe. You hadn't spent time in Europe yet, right? Up until this trip this year?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so and now you're not going to come back home again until after Worlds, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I really the last couple of years, aside from the pandemic year, we have the normal routine has been stay domestic until the national championships, and we go over to Europe for the final 2 months of the season. A couple of years we've gone over during Thanksgiving or earlier in the year to do some of the World Cups, and especially in my junior and under 23 years, while I was kind of at the top of those categories. But especially the last 2 years domestically, the USCX has provided a really strong opportunity for American racers in the early part of the season to stay home and focus on that structure. And I was really happy to win the series this year and have that consistency. There is something for us to look forward to with that series. It's broadcasted, there's prize money, and the competition's high. especially in the early races, we have some European riders coming over to do those races. So it's a way for us to improve. And
you get pretty good UCI points too, right? I mean, they made a couple years ago, they changed it because we were getting too many points actually in America, but now it's like balanced out a little bit more, but you still get pretty solid points. So when you go over to Europe, you get decent, call-up spot, right?
Yeah. The structure of the UCI points is a whole nother conversation. We could probably do a whole podcast series on the ins and outs of that and how the rules have changed over the years, and something that, not to go off too much into a tangent, but we used to have 6 to 8 World Cups. Now we have 14, most of them being in Europe. I mean, to have a World Cup, we need to have races all over the world. I fully support the effort to globalize the sport of cycling and to get more non-endemic sponsors involved and to increase the promotion of it. But where we are right now, I feel like that's too many World Cup rounds. And when you have most of them in Europe, there are more World Cup points available to the European athletes. So now we've started to see the kind of the pendulum swing back the other direction. I think I just saw my ranking is still top 20 in the overall rankings. Like I'm still performing well and getting good points, but now there are more World Cup points available. So I don't know if there are restrictions on how many World Cup rounds of points you can get. I know that there's a limit on how many C1s you get, your top 5 C1 points that you've scored, or your top, X amount of C2s, but yeah. No, that's a whole nother rabbit hole. We don't need to go too far into that.
Yeah, but because you could be, if you were, say, totally domestic. I mean, at one point it actually would have helped you, but at a lot of points it might not hurt you too. So at this point, though, you can go over there and you're not like haven't done any. You don't come there
right.
with, starting back row. You're better you're better than Pidcock when he comes to this first race this year.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, to get back to your question, I think that I'm still able to get in the first, most of the time I'm like second row, maybe third row. But I'm still able to get good start positions, and that does impact the race. But then, of course, when we see Van der Poel go from several rows back to in the top 5 of the whole shot, I mean, you have athletes like that are just absolute animals. But we've seen that for I think it was, I forget what year it was, but it was the last big snowy edition of the World Cup in Zolder, and Lars Bohm came to race, and he went from near one of the last rows to getting the whole shot, and you find a space that's open and you don't hesitate and you go through it, and you may find yourself in the top 3 of the whole shot. So there is luck involved with these starts. It's much more competitive and hectic, but it's also that adds to the fun of it. Like if you don't get a good start, you have the whole rest of the race to figure it out.
I always feel like too, you're racing too. You like last year at Worlds, for example, you were competitive up there in terms of your positioning, but towards the end, as the race kept going on, you kept improving over and over and over and over. And it seemed like in Europe a lot of times that happens too, right? It seemed like your consistency throughout the race pays off a lot.
Yeah, and it's all, I mean, that's also to tie it back to maturity. Like it's always good to get the whole shot, but also what's best for your effort over the course of the hour. And it's having the maturity and focus and skill to trust that going back to 10th wheel isn't the worst thing in the world. And it's something I've started to do a little bit more even domestically, where we have riders that are able to crank out some of the fastest lap times of the race in the first 2 laps, but they don't have the depth to do that same lap time, 8 laps in or 9 laps in. So there's always that trade-off. If I wanted to be hyper competitive for the start, I don't think, I have to ask myself, will I be here, in the last 2 laps? Because that's really where the race matters. There was a couple of years ago, it was during the pandemic year in 2020 that I achieved my best World Cup result in Dendermonde. It was a real slog of a race. It was 13th, I believe, on the day, I was over the moon with. And then the next day it was in Braden, I think. And I felt like I was playing with house money at that point. So I had a great start, and I ended up getting the whole shot, and Michael Van Toorn out and Mathieu Van der Poel are there. And like, there were some big names, and I had the momentum and I had the energy, and I said, you know what, let's see what I can do. So that was a moment that I experimented with getting the whole shot. And it wasn't like a world championship day where I'm very focused on the end result. That was one of those days that, I mean, it's a C2 in Belgium. It's a fun opportunity, but also like after a strong ride playing with house money now, like let's try something new. So, I mean, it's every once in a while, it's good to experiment with that, but
I think you said too, that day you got a chance to see what some of these other guys did too. Like you said, you're a real observer of what other people are doing. And so if you're seeing what the absolute best in the world are doing, that gives you some experience that's invaluable.
Exactly. And you need to go into every single opportunity viewing it exactly like it is, an opportunity to learn. And that was what I thought was so special during the 2020 season, where very few athletes were able to come over from the US to Europe. I was able to actually, notch some good results, but also I was gaining experience in racing at the pointy end of the races a couple of these days where I was able to follow these wheels and actually, gain a rapport with some of these athletes and text them back and forth after the race. Like, hey man, what were you running tire pressure for this day? Or did you start on a different tire and then switch on the first pit? Like what were you like? All these little things I was able to pick up on. And that's those are like homework assignments that no one else got. And those are lessons that I, stashed them away, tools in the toolbox, and really tried to take that experience forward. And all experience that I still carry with me.
So coming up now with Mole on Friday and then the World Cup on the 26th, how far forward do you look at courses? I mean, you must have some that you prefer, maybe others, or are you just focused at one at a time as they come? Or how do you look at this block now being in Europe? How do you balance your focus on what's coming up? And I've got another second part of the question.
Mm-hmm.
Are you got to find any perks now as being the U.S. national champion? Are you going to get maybe anything different, maybe different announcement, of course, but as being the reigning now U.S. cyclocross champion?
Well, to answer your first question, we do have a pretty compact schedule here, so it's very difficult to focus on each individual race. Like each individual race has their own features. I've been doing most of them for several seasons now. Sometimes when we train cyclocross skills, we try to visualize what we'll see in future races. So we want to train on features that are scary at times, to push our skills, but also to visualize what we'll see. Like preparing for a national championship, I knew there was going to be a triple run up because that was broadcasted pretty early on. So I created this circuit that had 3 run-ups in a row, and I had a very hard pedaling section after. So I was able to train and visualize that pretty regularly. Going into Mole, or it's a very sandy race, I know how to ride in the sand. I train a bit in the sand. I'm currently living in Beverly, Massachusetts, right close to the beach. So we have lots of sand to train on. However, it's a very heavy course with some solid elevation with some good running. So you try to identify what features you'll see. Sometimes you'll try to visualize it. I like to go back and rewatch previous editions of the races, but for this period, I don't really put too much emphasis on one day over the other. Like of course, there's always courses that you prefer, but looking further ahead, like we're a month and a half away from the World Championships. That's where I want to be at my best next.
Hoogheide,
Yep.
Anything special about Hoogheide that you like or dislike? Is there anything?
At its peak, you can fit 70, 80,000 spectators. And that's energy. That's you really feel it. There are very few other places that you'll feel that. So that's certainly exciting. But I think Hoogheide is one of those courses that it's really dictated by the conditions. The course is really unique. You can see most of the course from one vantage point as a spectator. There's the last stair run up going into the start finish, and the start finish is a really unique stretch where you start on a downhill and it's like the slingshot effect going up to the finishing sprint. You go up and down, this smaller hill, through the woods, and there's a part of the course that's in a wide open flat field. If it's frozen ground, it's going to be like an F1 racing track, and you're going to be running grifos, and it's just going to be scary fast. If it's a little bit warmer and it's been raining that week, it could be shin deep mud. It also depends on what lines are formed that day. Like there's a lot of different variables. So it's not like it's, with mole, you know what you're going to get, even if it's cold or it's warm or it's raining, sand is sand, right? You ride the sand a little bit differently, or sometimes it gets a little firmer, the ruts are there, but you're still going to see the sand. But you're not always going to see slick corners or heavy mud or things like that. So it's, at the end of the day, it's just try to, come into it with the best form you can and good health, and, trust the skills that you have, because you do need to, touch on this again, be a well-rounded athlete and have as many skills in the toolbox as you can. That at the end of the day, that's cyclocross.
Excellent. Well, I don't know where we're running time wise, but it's been a thrill to talk to you about a variety of subjects, with your national championship race being a highlight too. And I know you've got dinner duty, right? You talked a little bit to us before. So what does that mean?
Yeah. So we are. Well, tonight's a pretty relaxed night with dinner. We're cooking, we have a chicken in the oven with some quinoa and some roasted vegetables. We're making a salad with it. So it's a lot of real clean food here. But we're staying. There's going to be the entire Steve Tilford Foundation racing team is going to be staying in one house. And I mean, you can't have 6-8 people in the kitchen at the same time. So we're divvying up the duties here, 2 people at a time. Take dinner. Everyone's on their own for breakfast and lunch, because everyone wakes up at different times or different training schedules, or the mechanics have their hours that they're working. But dinners is our time to come together, debrief as a team, to relax, to have fun, play a game of cards, or just whatever. Like we have that, especially we're here during Christmas and the New Year. We got a Christmas tree yesterday, so it's adds a little bit of that festiveness to the house. But so it's, I mean, dinner is 2 people in the kitchen. Tonight's our night. And,
All right. Well, you seem like you're in good physical health right now. Everybody healthy and just, I mean, there's still a lot of sickness going around in different places, especially with the weather changing like that too. So hopefully you're gonna all stay healthy and have a great time with this racing coming up in the holidays.
Sorry guys, you just cut out there.
Oh,
just saying that, you look like you're looking healthy, feeling good. I mean, it's, after international travel and the different weather conditions, it's probably really big to stay on top of, just not getting sick. So hopefully everybody's staying healthy and you have a good time with this, all this racing coming up in the holidays too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always a big thing. So we're fingers crossed everyone stays healthy, and we're crossing our T's, dotting our I's, and looking forward to some exciting racing coming up.
All right. Yeah, well, it's always great to talk to you.
I was constantly getting dinged up too. So not only getting a cold or something like that too, but just, any little race where you're hitting your ankle or something like that too, or, it's like it's everything complicated so much more. And then, here in the States, not only does COVID still, but, RSV and flu and colds and stuff too. So you aren't probably quite as, conscious in terms of wearing masks every place anymore. It's during COVID year, we had to be so careful, but at the same time, there's still a lot of things that can happen that could derail a week of racing, which would be a lot of races, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, this is something that we've been thinking about for several years. My entire time as a professional and being around high level athletes, this time of year has always been that time of year where people are getting sick, they're getting colds, they're getting respiratory infections, they're getting rung down. The days are shorter. You go to Europe and it's a little darker here, and it's just one of those things you have to be on top of. So it's early in the pandemic, we were joking briefly about, wow, it's finally, the world sees what it's like to be a pro cyclist on peak form, because that's kind of what you have to do, where you have to kind of shut yourself down, and you really on peak form, the immune system's down, and you're at the end of the season, you've had a lot of travel in the year, and you have to stay on top of it. So it's something we're conscious of, but at the end of the day too, we're able to do something pretty special here, and hopefully able to continue this momentum.
Awesome. Well, it's always great to talk to you, and Man, I wish you the best of luck. Thanks for all the insights, and man, just have a great racing time and great holidays.
All right. Very good. Dean, Randy, thank you very much for having me on your show, and really thank you everyone for listening. And yeah, really looking forward to representing the Stars and Stripes for the next year.
Excellent. Thanks, Curtis.
All right. Take care. Thank you guys.
Have a good dinner.
All right. Appreciate it.
Bye.